Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 559. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We got a big week here on the show today, solo show today. Co-host of the show, Connor Freeman, will return to the show tomorrow, and then we will have other episodes late in the weekend. I'm trying to set up a pretty cool guest to have on the show, somebody that would be a first-timer. So looking forward to putting all that together for you guys. So be sure you subscribe to the show. You're not going to want to miss what I have for this week. YouTube, Rumble, Odysee for the video version. It's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. Of course, it's hosted with the Libertarian Institute, where I'm the news editor. Great place to find all of my work. You can also find what I do at antiwar.com. We post this show on the blog there. I'm the opinion editor at antiwar.com, so I put together the viewpoints every day and sometimes write a few news stories over the weekend. And then, of course, you can also follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_, where I post all the shows, all the articles that I write. So it's a great way to keep up with all of my work. If you do follow me on Twitter, think about hitting that alarm bell. You got to go to my profile, and then you click that, and they actually notify you when I put out tweets. And I usually don't put out like junk or joke tweets. Most of them are, news stories, or my news stories are parts of like mainstream news stories that I think are really important, quotes from really important officials. So you're going to get a lot of good stuff if you follow me on Twitter. All right, with that, let's get into today's show. First article up here. Blinken says new U.S.-backed Haitian government to be installed soon. The U.S. and its partners in the region are forming a new Haitian government after forcing Prime Minister Ariel Henry, who was installed by the U.S. in 2021, to resign. To join the new government, ministers must support a Kenyan-led armed force to restore order in Port-au-Prince. Secretary of State Blinken said that Washington was still working on to handpick the government, but would be installed into power soon. And so, this is almost like kind of a funny joke of what you would think about, like U.S. to replace U.S. installed government in Haiti with new U.S. installed government in Haiti, where it's obvious, right, that the U.S., Washington, cannot handpick a government for Haiti. Not only do the Haitian people not seem interested, but the reason that this particular government fell. Now, there's always a lot of reasons that governments fall, but over the past really 6 months, and then over the past month in particular, a lot of the resistance to Henry in Haiti, and I think a lot of the urgency by the, whatever you want to call them, I like opposition groups, are various criminal gangs to take power in Port-au-Prince, and was to be able to prevent Henry from returning to the country after he signed a deal with the Kenyan president, that's William Ruto, to send Kenyan, what they call police, but they're really just soldiers, right? Anytime you send armed, uniformed men to a foreign country, they're soldiers. You could say that they're there for policing measures, but that's more just like saying our goal here is counterinsurgency rather than saying our goal here is to wipe you out. It's still a military operation, right? They're not fighting maybe another government when they go into the country, but they're going to be fighting, again, these groups that have been dubbed by the international community as gangs. And I think that's done, in large part to create this image in American people's minds that this is just absolutely awful, and that, if you have a gang, there's really no potential that that gang turns into a government, right? When you talk about like wars in the Middle East, we talk about opposition groups. And so, there was the armed opposition to Bashar al-Assad. And when you phrase it that way, right, if they were calling this the armed opposition to Ariel Henry, then the armed opposition sounds almost like it's trying to form a government in waiting, like, right, like, this isn't just some random thugs. These are people who are Haitians who are opposed to the current Haitian government. And, while I'm not pro-war, I don't think anybody should, take up arms really, other than in self-defense and in a pretty limited sense. But, at the same time, that calling them gangs really is I think a pretty powerful propaganda point. And then too, right, when you say that these are armed gangs, and then the leader of that gang is nicknamed Barbecue, it gives Americans the impression that, this is something like what we've heard of in Mexico, or of course, torture around the world, where people are literally getting barbecued. And now we've got this cannibal propaganda flowing around. By the way, my colleague at the Libertarian Institute, Patrick McFarland, has done a couple of really good articles recently on kind of the right-wing influencers buying into the propaganda when it suits their world vision. And this is another place where that happened with the whole cannibalism thing. Now, of course, the guy who's nicknamed Barbecue is actually a former cop. And if we have a cop in the United States, or a former cop in the United States, and he's nicknamed Barbecue, you think, well, he was either known for hosting a lot of his fellow, members of the police force in his backyard for a barbecue, or maybe he, after he retired, he opened up a barbecue joint, but, nobody assumes that he's cooking anybody alive, and certainly not eating them. All right, next up here. U.S. will do whatever it takes to block Chinese access to advanced tech. So this is a quote from Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo. She said, "We cannot allow China to have access for their military advancement to our most sophisticated semiconductor technology. So yes, we will do whatever it takes to prevent our people expanding our controls." Now, this is something that we've seen time and time again is actually started to raise quite a bit of ire in China. And that is every time the U.S. puts any new economic control, penalty, punishment, tariff on the Chinese, we claim this is for our national security because somehow China is getting access to our technology that we don't want them to have access to. Now, even with the strictest of export controls and things like that to China, I think we would still see these parts and components getting into Chinese weapons. There's a big report, and I think it was Senator Mark Warner who led the committee hearing, but he had this group bring this report forward saying that they're still finding American part components from top American companies, including, well-entrenched members of the military-industrial complex. Their parts components are still being funneled into Russian and becoming a part of Russian weapons that are being used in Ukraine, in parts that were made after February of 2022, which is critical here. And so, one, I think it's kind of a fool's errand what Gina Raimondo is trying to do here. You can't just completely shut off, have global trade, except for a few countries, right? If you're going to have global trade, your parts and pieces are probably going to end up everywhere. So that's problem number one. Of course, problem number two is that this national security excuse for why we have cracked down more and more and more on business with China has really deteriorated U.S. relationship between the U.S. and China and has caused more problems. All right, next up here, this is maybe the most important article that I've written for some time. I got some really important and really great feedback on this article, so very happy to be able to talk about it on the show today. And Washington renewed urgency for TikTok ban is due to war on Gaza. So I wrote this for antiwar.com on March 15th. The renewed urgency to pass a bill to ban TikTok emerged due to Washington's concerns about how users were interacting with content regarding the Israeli war in Gaza. Many of TikTok's users share pro-Palestinian messages far more frequently than pro-Israeli viewpoints. The public debate between members of the House of Representatives centers around the Chinese ownership of TikTok and the Chinese government's level of influence over the platform. However, renewed interest in passing the legislation only materialized in Washington because many of TikTok's users share content with an overwhelming pro-Palestinian message. So I want to give some credit for this article to two people who made videos about this and talked about it before I wrote this up. One is Glenn Greenwald, who I mentioned in this article, and the other is Brianna Joy Gray, who's one of the hosts on The Hill Rising. And she did, I'm not sure if it was her radar or her monologue or whatever you want to call it, but she did a little segment of their show on this, I think last Friday, if you want to go check that out, where she breaks it down. But a lot of what they both have to say is in this article. Of course, if you want to listen to both of their commentaries, you'll probably pick up a little bit more too. So Glenn Greenwald drew attention to the issue on his nightly show, System Update. He explained that along with the TikTok ban bill made no progress over 4 years because of the app's popularity among young Americans. Greenwald went on to report that members of Congress and Washington insiders on both sides of the aisle were spurred to act by the platform's overwhelmingly pro-Palestinian content. On Wednesday, a majority of Democrats and Republicans in the House voted in favor of the bill. President Biden said he would sign it if it reached his desk. The administration helped Congress craft some of the legislation in the bill, the language in the bill. Jacob Hellberg, a member of the Congressional Research and Advisory Panel called the U.S.-China Economic Security Review Commission, spoke with the Wall Street Journal about Congress's recent change in attitude. He explained that, and the Wall Street Journal also reported that officials from TikTok said the bill regained momentum so quickly that it was caught off guard. And this is something that Michael Tracy, who I think is, one of America's most astute political commentators, at least in this post-Russiagate world, has said the same thing, that, it's very rare in the past decade or so to have a bill gain so much momentum and be passed so quickly when it really could be so controversial. And I've also read, since I wrote this article, in fact, that it's been reported that Thomas Massie gave quite a long speech and a very good speech against this on the floor. Now, again, he didn't really talk about this Israel-Hamas point, but he was talking about the expansive powers that this bill gives the White House, not just to ban TikTok, but also to potentially ban other websites. And the report was that the number of no votes tripled because of what Massie had to say. And the number of no votes, I think, was only around like 65, 15 Republicans and 50 Democrats. So this is what Hellberg said about the bill, according to the Wall Street Journal. It was slow going until October 7th. The attack that day in Israel by Hamas and the ensuing conflict in Gaza became the turning point for the push against TikTok. People who historically had taken a position on TikTok became concerned about how Israel was portrayed in the videos, and what they saw was an increasing anti-Semitic content posted to the app. Now, this isn't something I get into in the article, but there's a few places where this came from. There was a there was a report brought to Congress. I don't think it was done by Congress on this. And that report said there was a difference like 1-69 between pro-Palestinian versus pro-Israeli content. Now, a few things here. I would be curious to know, especially on, Twitter, Facebook, and things like that, what the number of pro-Ukrainian hashtags were compared to the pro-Russian hashtags in February and March of 2022. I'm guessing we would see maybe not that extent of disparities because I think there's a maybe more broad community on Facebook and Twitter versus TikTok, which is mainly young people who... And when I say young people, I just mean somebody essentially younger than myself. I'm 33. So basically anybody in their 20s, early 30s is kind of what I'm talking about here. I feel like a lot of people who are kind of younger than myself is where people went more for the Snapchat, Instagram, and TikTok kind of community versus where my peers were mostly on Facebook or Twitter. So just being mostly younger, you're probably going to be able to get a wider disparity just because the people within that cohort are the most likely Americans to support or at least not view Israel in as positive of a light. So we also heard this from the bill's author, Mike Gallagher, about the October 7th connection. The bill's author, Representative Mike Gallagher, he's a Republican from Wisconsin and one of the most outspoken China hawks in Washington and the chair of the House Subcommittee on China, explained that the likelihood of the legislation becoming law has sharply increased because of other members of the China committee believed the platform was exposing users to too much pro-Palestinian content. Another place this came from was the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. I believe it's their president, somebody high-ranking in the organization is named Jonathan Greenblatt. And in December, he was on I want to say MSNBC or one of the mainstream news networks, and he was talking about this with the host about how, there has to be a ban of TikTok because of the amount of content, and they need to crack down on the anti-Semitic comment. Now, of course, these are people who all believe in the definition of anti-Semitism, that anti-Semitism includes anti-Zionism. And of course, Zionism is this idea that the Jews should control the whole of their historic homeland, which includes Gaza and the West Bank, and either, to treat the Palestinians as second, third class citizens, or just to drive them out of Palestine. And so being against the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians is anti-Semitic, according to a lot of people with a lot of influence in Washington. And so this is how they've really demonized TikTok and made so much progress here. You'll often hear this ridiculous comment made by Nikki Haley that, like, if you spend X amount of time on TikTok, you will become 30% more anti-Semitic, or something stupid like that. Well, these are all the little facts and figures that people are bringing to members of Congress and our political elite, trying to get them to ban TikTok. So proponents of the legislation argue that TikTok's young users are manipulated by the Chinese government through the app. However, the pro-Palestinian viewpoint, alarming members of Congress, is widely shared among TikTok's core demographic. Around half of TikTok users are content creators are aged 18 to 34. Supporters for Tel Aviv and President Biden have been dropping among this demographic, as Israel's 5-month slaughter in Gaza has killed over 31,000 Palestinians and caused a humanitarian nightmare. About half of voting Americans under 35 believe Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. All right, so next up here, this one from Dave DeCamp, and this is something that you don't want to believe. You really, as an American, I don't want to believe that this is the direction my government is going to go. But Dave found this from ABC News. I actually found it in a report from the Times of Israel as well. So I think we could pretty well confirm that this is something that is at least being kicked around in the Biden administration. The article here: U.S. considering giving Israel more military aid as leverage. So recent media reports have said there are discussions within the Biden administration to condition military aid to Israel if it invades Rafa as a way to reduce civilian casualties. The assumption was that the U.S. would threaten to cut off or reduce weapons supply to Israel, but according to a report from ABC News, the U.S. might do the opposite. The report cited U.S. officials who said the U.S. hasn't made a decision on leveraging military aid, and it's possible additional aid, not less, will be offered as an incentive to reduce civilian casualties. The U.S. official made the comment in response to senior Israeli officials complaining that U.S. weapons shipments weren't arriving fast enough. The official said in the wake of the October 7th, U.S. arms were coming very fast, but now we are finding it is very slow. U.S. officials denied there was any intentional slowdown in weapons shipments. When asked about the Israeli claims, White House National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said the U.S. was going to continue supplying Israel with arms. He said, "I'm not going to get into the timeline for every individual system being provided. We continue to support Israel with their self-defense needs. That is not going to change. We've been very, very direct about that." Now, I will say, in the Times of Israel article on this, the U.S. officials just said that this was mostly due to the types of weapons, I guess, being shipped to Israel. And so on October 7th, there's probably large U.S. stockpiles, and some of these weapons are actually stored in Israel. They're under U.S. lock and key or whatever. However, actually that works out, but they're U.S. weapons that are stored in Israel that the U.S. could distribute to Israel. And so my guess is weapons are coming a lot faster for that reason. Also, if you look at the war that's been going on in Ukraine, Western arms stockpiles are fairly depleted, even by the time October 7th rolls around. However, my guess is that Israel needs at least some weapons platforms that are different from what the U.S. is shipping to Ukraine. And so in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, it's probably very easy for Washington to just put lots and lots of weapons on planes and fly them over to Israel. But as time has gone on, logistically, it may have become a little bit more complicated, and the U.S. may be kind of struggling to find all the weapons to send to Israel. That's kind of my assumption of what's going on here. The U.S. provides Israel with $3.8 billion in annual military aid, and the Biden administration has provided over 100 arms deals since October 7th to support the mass slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. The U.S. is looking to give Israel another $14 billion as a part of the $95 billion foreign military aid bill that passed through the Senate but has not been voted on in the House. It's important to remember that when the House actually took up the Israel aid as a standalone bill, they jacked that up to $17 billion. And so I think it's very possible that if that does pass the House, it would be at that level and not the $14 billion level. All right, next up here, Israel says they are going to attack Rafa. Netanyahu approves plans for Rafa ground invasion. I wrote this for the antiwar.com on March 15th. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu approved a ground assault on Rafa. At least 1.5 million Palestinians are crammed into the border city, many displaced from other regions in the besieged enclave. The White House has requested Tel Aviv have a plan for the Palestinians before attacking. The Israeli Prime Minister's office said Netanyahu, quote, approved the plans for action in Rafah. Friday's announcement said the military is prepared for the operational side and for the evacuation of the population. The statement did not provide details or a timeline for the attack. Humanitarian organizations have warned that an assault on Rafah would exacerbate the humanitarian catastrophic situation facing the people of Gaza. The attack would go against the wishes of Tel Aviv's primary backer, that's Washington. On Thursday, Netanyahu said Israel would resist all international pressures and go ahead with the operation. As Prime Minister of Israel, I reject the pressure. We have been doing this successfully for 5 months already. This is not the time. This is record time in the history of Israel's wars. I will continue to reject the pressure. We will enter Rafah. We will complete the elimination of Hamas battalions. We will restore security, and we will bring total victory to the people of Israel and the state of Israel. Now, a few problems with this, of course, is it's all propaganda. Even if Israel goes into Rafah and destroys the city, it's not going to eliminate Hamas. The U.S. intelligence community and the Israeli military have both admitted to this case that Israel will not be able to eliminate Hamas through this war. In fact, Hamas is going to continue to exist, and I'm sure there's going to be fertile recruiting for any kind of Palestinian armed resistance groups to Israel after this conflict is over. I'm sure will be just tons of hatred for what the Israelis have done and inflicted on the Palestinians in Gaza. Additionally, we see from other areas of Gaza, such as the Al-Shifa hospital, which was raided by the Israelis months ago, and now they're back raiding the hospital once again, claiming that Hamas is there. And so, this idea that Israel is just going to go in, wipe out the terrorist infrastructure and be done with this, that's their propaganda line, that's what they're saying, is just so far from the truth. And anybody who's even paying attention to what's happening on the ground in Gaza now, as the military operations are still going on, can see that the case is that, attacking Rafah isn't going to end the fight in any way. So the remarks followed criticism of Netanyahu by President Biden and several other U.S. officials who requested the Israel not to attack Rafah without a plan for the Palestinian civilians. Earlier this week, Tel Aviv said it would create humanitarian islands within the strip for a large number of refugees sure to be displaced in the ground assault. The plan appeared untenable as there is not enough aid entering Gaza to sustain the islands, and Israeli forces have routinely attacked other areas deemed safe zones. On Friday, Blinken appeared to reject the humanitarian islands proposal. He said, "We have to see a clear and implementable plan, not to get civilians out of harm's way, but also to make sure once they're out of harm's way, they're properly cared for." And now, we'll go back to this article in a second. I just want to mention here that on Sunday, John Kirby said that the White House still has not viewed the Israeli plan. He said, "We would certainly welcome the opportunity to get a look at what their plans are before they move into Rafah. And I think it's important for your viewers to understand They have not done that yet. They have not moved into Rafa. We have been watching this very closely, and we haven't seen any evidence that, and he added that Hamas wasn't stealing the aid. He just said, we have been watching this very closely, and we haven't seen any evidence that Hamas has proliferated off a lot of the humanitarian assistance in a nefarious way. And so I just wanted to throw that in there because there's so many people, just regular Americans on Twitter who believe the Israeli propaganda that, we can't allow any aid into Gaza because Hamas is stealing it all. And here you have Israel's main backer saying that that's not even true. But, importantly, even with the U.S. demands that Israel set up a humanitarian situation, a safe zone, something for the Palestinians before attacking Rafa, not only are they not doing that, but they're not even bothering to share some sort of lie with the Americans. It's quite unbelievable. So it's unclear what, if any, action the White House will take if Tel Aviv ignores U.S. pleas not to attack Rafah. The U.S. is Israel's primary supporter and has substantial leverage over Tel Aviv. One point of influence is weapon sales, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. That's SPIRI. 69% of Israeli weapons imports from 2019 to 2023 came from U.S. suppliers, with, by the way, the other 30% almost all coming from Germany, another country that I'm sure the U.S. could help leverage a little bit here to make some concessions from Israel. Since October 7th, the White House has approved over 100 weapon sales for Tel Aviv, and the U.S. has shipped Israel weapons on a near daily basis. Still, the White House appears unwilling to take any action to rein in Tel Aviv. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said on Tuesday that and he refuted a report from Politico that said Biden was considering conditioning military aid to Israel if it invades Rafah. And now we actually have a little bit more context behind his comments. And so he was saying that, we're not going to cut Israeli military aid to Israel if they invade Rafah. And I guess what he should have said is we're actually thinking about increasing it a little bit. All right. So Israel-Hamas hostage deal talks expected to resume in Qatar. This from Dave DeCamp. Qatari and Egyptian mediated hostage deal talks between Israel and Hamas are expected to resume in Qatar after a large pause in negotiations. Israeli media reported that the Israeli Security Cabinet approved to send a delegation led by the Mossad chief to Doha on Monday. The Mossad chief received a general mandate to negotiate, but some decisions will have to be approved from Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant. Netanyahu has previously rejected the outline for a hostage deal that was drawn up by the Mossad chief and other top Israeli intelligence and military officials. He calls Hamas's latest proposal ridiculous, but said he planned to send a negotiating team to Doha anyways. My guess is that the Americans are basically making Netanyahu at least send a negotiating team. I don't think we're close enough to a deal to get one done. And as I'm pointing out, it's actually, I think, getting more problematic and almost further away from being able to make a deal here, because Israel is arresting more and more Palestinians. And so when we talk about any kind of hostage release or anything like that, right, the Israelis say, we got to release all the hostages that Hamas took on October 7th. Well, since then, Israel has taken thousands of Palestinian hostages, innocent women and children. I'm not talking about members of Hamas. I'm talking about innocent women and children. Well, most of the Israelis that Hamas still holds, by the way, are Israeli soldiers. Israel has thousands and thousands of Palestinian civilians, political prisoners, in Israeli jails. And so to have a real hostage deal where hostages are released en masse on both sides is going to require a lot more Palestinians being released, because Israel has a lot more Palestinian hostages than the other way around. All right, next up here, this one I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on the 17th. U.S. Senator slams Israeli claims about UNRWA as flat-out lies. So, a Democrat senator blasted Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and other leaders in Tel Aviv for making false accusations about aid agencies operating in Gaza. Tel Aviv has charged the UN aid agency UNRWA with acting as a proxy for Hamas. Senator Chris Van Hollen said on faced the nation that Netanyahu's accusations against UNRWA were an attempt to eliminate the aid agency. There's no doubt that the claims that Prime Minister Netanyahu and others are making that somehow UNRWA is a proxy for Hamas are just flat out lies. That's a flat out lie. If you look at the person who's in charge of operations on the ground in Gaza for UNRWA, it's about a 20-year U.S. Army veteran. You can be sure he's not in cahoots with Hamas. Netanyahu has wanted to get rid of UNRWA since at least 2017. In January, Tel Aviv claimed it had compiled an intelligence dossier that showed extensive ties between Hamas and the aid agency, including that 12 UNRWA employees participate in the October 7th attack. However, over the past 2 months, Israel has failed to produce evidence to back these allegations. Additionally, an UNRWA investigation has uncovered Israelis used torture to generate the false confessions from Palestinians. After Israel made the charges against UNRWA, the U.S. and 15 other countries cut funding for the aid agency. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the accusations were highly credible. As a result of the case against UNRWA has started to crumble, and 3 countries, Australia, Sweden, and Canada, with Australia being the most recent, have resumed funding for the agency. UNRWA is crucial to providing life-saving aid to Palestinians in Gaza. Still, its workers and buildings have come under frequent attack during Israel's 5-month onslaught. At least 165 UNRWA workers have been killed. Last week, Israel targeted a food distribution center in Rafa that was run by UNRWA, killing 5 people. All right, last article here today. UNICEF says Israel has killed over 13,000 children in Gaza. The UN's Child Relief Agency said on Sunday that over 13,000 children have been killed in Gaza and that more could be dead under the rubble. Thousands more have been injured, or we can't even determine where they are. They may be stuck under the rubble, said UNICEF's executive director, Kathleen Russell. We haven't seen that rate of death among children in almost any conflict in the world. Gaza's health ministry says that over 31,000 Palestinians have been killed, and consistently stated that around 70% of the casualties are women and children. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin previously said over 25,000 women and children have been killed in Gaza, but the Pentagon walked his comment back, claiming he was talking about all Palestinians killed. Russell said that she visited a hospital ward where children were suffering from severe malnutrition, and the place was quiet because the babies, don't even have the energy to cry. Separately, the UN Palestinian Relief Agency, that's UNRWA, said 1 in 3 children under the age of 2 in Gaza are now acutely malnourished. Children malnutrition is spreading fast and reaching unprecedented levels in Gaza. Children have already started to starve to death in Gaza, with dozens of malnourished deaths already reported. Despite the horrific situation and Israel's continued aid restrictions, the U.S. is still providing unconditional military support for the slaughter and starvation campaign against the Palestinians in Gaza. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today. Like I said, we have a lot of exciting stuff coming up at Conflicts of Interest this week, so be sure that you are subscribed somewhere and that you're catching every episode of the show. Thank you all so much for tuning in today.